Talk about cities. They might be the single greatest invention in human history. Seriously. But in India, they're also an unfinished promise. Now, this isn't a story about failure. Not at all. It's a story about the absolutely massive, untapped potential that's just waiting to be unlocked inside the chaos and the incredible energy of our urban centers.
So, what is it that makes cities such a powerful idea? Well, the economic magic really comes down to one word: density. Think about it. When you bring a ton of people and companies close together, you get these amazing network effects. It suddenly becomes way easier to find the right job or the right person for a job. Ideas spread like wildfire, and we can all share big, important things like metros and power grids. As the economist Edward Glaser puts it, this is what makes us more productive, more innovative, and richer.
Okay, so that's the theory. That's the promise. But for millions of people living in Indian cities, the day-to-day reality feels, well, a little different, doesn't it? It's the absolute grind of that long commute. It's the frustration of services that you just can't quite rely on. And it's the constant stress on infrastructure that always feels like it's bursting at the seams.
And that brings us to the core question we're going to tackle in this explainer. With India's incredible economic growth story, why haven't our cities transformed into those globally competitive, super livable powerhouses we'd expect? What is holding them back from really hitting their full potential?
To get to the bottom of that, we first have to wrap our heads around something we're calling India's urban paradox.
It's this split personality, you see. On one side, you have this immense promise. Cities are supposed to be these incredible engines of growth, right? Magnets for talent, places where new ideas are born. But on the other side, the reality is that the very density that should be our strength often just turns into congestion, stress, and informal sprawl, which actually waters down all those potential gains.
And wow, this data just captures that paradox perfectly. Get this, the world's top 10 fastest growing cities are all in India. The speed, the scale, it's just off the charts. But here's the catch. That explosive population growth hasn't really translated into the kind of economic clout or global influence you'd expect. We've got the scale for sure, but we're still waiting for the full economic impact to match.
So that leads us to a really fascinating idea. What if the problem starts with how we're even looking at our cities? What if the official story is actually hiding the true scale of what's happening? Let's take a look at the real map of urban India.
All right, so officially, the Census of India has this pretty strict three-part checklist for what they count as urban. You need a minimum population, a certain percentage of men working outside of farming, and a specific population density. That's the ruler we've been using for decades.
But is that the whole story? I mean, come on. We all know that life doesn't stop at these neat administrative lines on a map. What if the functional reality of urban life, how people actually live, work, and move around, tells a very, very different story, a much bigger story?
And this is where you can see that story for yourself, literally from space. We're looking at satellite images of Mumbai at night. The red spots, that's the dense urban core back in 2012. Now watch what happens when we jump to 2023. Whoa! See that explosion of yellow? That is the hidden growth, the semi-urban sprawl just blooming far beyond the old city limits. It's undeniable.
So just how much bigger is the real picture? Well, according to analysis that uses this kind of satellite data, India may have been, wait for it, 63% urban, way back in 2015. That's almost double the official census figure of 31%. That's not a small difference. That's a game changer.
And if you want to see a perfect example of this in action, just look at Kerala. On an old map, it looks like a bunch of separate towns. But in reality, it's becoming one continuous ribbon-like urban corridor. These areas are functionally urban. They're connected, they're growing into each other, creating a totally new kind of urban landscape that traditional definitions just completely miss.
Okay, so, big reveal. India is way more urban than we thought. But that just raises an even bigger question. Why are these huge, sprawling urban areas struggling so much? The answer, it turns out, lies in a fundamental problem of power. Or, more accurately, a lack of it. If you ask, who's in charge of the city? The honest answer is, it's complicated. It's not like in other global cities where you have a single powerful mayor. Here, power is shattered into pieces. You've got the local municipality, then you've got state authorities, then different state departments. They all have a piece of the pie, but nobody has the whole recipe.
And this creates two totally different ways of operating. Global cities are set up to compete. They are treated like autonomous economic players. They can line up their planning and their money to attract talent and business. Indian cities, on the other hand, are mostly set up to just comply. They end up acting more like implementation arms for the state government, with their authority all fragmented.
And you can see the financial result of that comply model right here. Just look at this chart. Indian cities raise a tiny, tiny fraction of their own money compared to their peers around the world. It's not even close. And when you don't control your own finances, you just can't make the big, long-term investments in things like transport and water that your citizens desperately need.
You know, this quote just nails the whole issue perfectly. What we often have is administration, where power is spread so thin that nobody can really be blamed when things go wrong. What we need is governance, which concentrates power so you can actually get things done and hold someone accountable.
Now, this governance problem isn't just some abstract political science concept. Oh no, it has very real, very tangible effects that you can see and feel every single day. It leads directly to gridlock, to urban sprawl, and to the creation of something called dead capital.
Dead capital. Sounds pretty dramatic, right? But it's a powerful idea. It basically refers to assets, and in a city, the number one asset is land that are locked up and can't be used productively. The value's there, but it's stuck, frozen by restrictive rules or other market problems.
And here is a textbook example of how we create dead capital. We put strict limits on building up. This table shows the Floor Space Index, or FSI. It's basically a rule that says how high you can build on a piece of land. Now just compare the low limits in Mumbai or Bengaluru to global cities like Shanghai or Singapore. It's a completely different world. Our rules literally force cities to sprawl outwards instead of growing up efficiently.
And that outward sprawl? Well, it's an absolute recipe for gridlock. When you spread everyone out, it becomes incredibly hard and expensive to build effective public transport. As you can see here, a single train line is just vastly more efficient at moving people than cars are. Building more and more flyovers without fixing the underlying land use rules is like treating a symptom while ignoring the disease. The source material calls it concrete without consequence, and that's exactly what it is.
But listen, this story doesn't have to end here. The challenges are huge, there's no doubt, but the opportunity is even bigger. So how do we finally do it? How do we unlock the incredible potential of our cities?
The path forward really boils down to three fundamental shifts. First, we have to completely change our perspective. We need to stop seeing cities as problems to be managed and start seeing them for what they are, our most critical pieces of economic infrastructure. Second, we have to empower city leadership with real autonomy, both in terms of money and decision-making. And third, we need to align all the systems, planning, finance, and governance, around one single goal, making life better for the people who live there.
And that brings us right back to where we started. The promise of India's cities is still unfinished, but it is absolutely not out of reach. So the final question for all of us is this: how do we finally make the shift from just managing the pressures of urban growth to truly benefiting from its incredible power, unleashing our cities as vibrant, livable, and productive sources of opportunity for every single one of us?